Welcome, everyone. We're just going to wait a few more seconds until the waiting room is cleared. Till we open the door to the waiting room. Just give us 1 second yet. So again, welcome to this extraordinary forum this afternoon on Black professionals and allyship. I just want to say an event like this does not happen by itself. The idea of a roundtable discussion with outstanding individuals outside of our Waldorf school first was initiated by the high school students in the Black Student Union and organized by the SU's co-presidents, Sana Trope and Zamia Jean. And I also want to acknowledge the behind the scenes work of the BSU's faculty advisor, Ms. Nicole Litrin, for her guidance in pulling together this event, which is happening across 3 time zones. We're aiming to end our conversation this afternoon at 1:50 or so everyone can be back in the school schedule at 2 o'clock. And we've really carved out this time to hear from our extraordinary panelists for the next hour and a half and the life wisdom they've gained in their careers and their lives. And I want to thank them right up top for making time in what I'm sure are busy lives of service to others to share with us this afternoon. So without further ado, I want to turn it over to our co-presidents of the BSU, Zamia Jean, and I think Sana will be speaking first, Sana Troop. Sana?
Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Black Professional and Allyship Forum. Today, we'll be discussing the different aspects of being a Black professional within the workforce while getting insight on the importance of allyship from allies and members of the Black community. We will also hear from different perspectives on what truly makes an ally with our outstanding panelists. First, I would like to thank the members of the Black Student Union and the school administration for making this forum possible. I would also like to thank our amazing panelists for taking the time out of their busy days to speak with us. We'll start off with a 45-minute moderated forum, and then we'll allot 35 minutes at the end for questions. If you have questions at any point, please direct your questions to the Q&A box, and our panelists will answer the questions during that time frame. So before we start our moderated forum, I'd like to do a quick round of introductions. So Chelsea, would you like to start us off first with your introduction?
Sure. Thank you, Sanai. Hi, everyone. Happy Thursday. Happy Black History Month. Thank you all for inviting me. My name is Chelsea Williams-Diggs. I use she, her, and hers, pronouns. And I am the program specialist at their Institute of Justice. I don't know how much more I'm supposed to say, but I want to especially thank Sanai and Zamia and all the students of the Black Student Union. You all are really super inspiring. I've heard from your principal that you all started this student union and are really pushing your school forward to talk about these issues more explicitly. So congratulations, and recognize that you are really pushing the work forward in your school and in your communities. That's amazing. And I also want to send love to all the other students listening today. I know how difficult it is to be a student and to be living and studying in this pandemic, and then also be grappling with issues of racial injustice as well as other injustices. So just all of you, pat yourselves on the back for being here today, for waking up, for if you're on your laptops or in school, you deserve all the kudos. And then of course to all the administrators who are supporting the work. I don't know how much more I'm supposed to say in my introduction. I think hopefully my bio captures it pretty well, but I've worked for the past several years at the intersections of racial justice, of gender equity, reproductive justice, and youth activism, which makes me really excited to be here today. I've had my hands in all types of things that hopefully I'll get to talk more about later, but really always with an eye towards liberation for my community and for all folks, regardless of the oppressive systems that they live under. So it's a pleasure to be here, and thank you again. I'll pass it to the next panelist, whoever that might be.
Yeah, thank you so much. And Jeffrey, if you'd like to go next with your introduction.
Sure. Hello, everyone. My name is Jeff Beckham. Greetings from the Windy City, Chicago, Illinois. I currently serve as CEO of Chicago Scholars. Chicago Scholars is an organization that's been around for 25 years, and I'm the third CEO of the organization. We help students, high school seniors who are either first generation, the first in their families to go to college, or from low-income communities, complete college, get into their careers, and become the next generation of leaders in their career and their communities. For the last 25 years, we've worked now with over 4,000 students and currently have 2,926 college students that we help all over the country. Our students go to 200 plus colleges and universities all over. I'm also an artist. I'm sitting actually in my art gallery now in Chicago, and I use art to tell narratives and stories of people of color, what I call American history, not just Black history. Folks that have helped build the country, and individuals that have led to the liberation and continued fight for justice of people of color in America. I'm very happy to be here. Thank you for having me, and look forward to the conversation.
Thank you so much. We really appreciate it. And Irene, would you like to go next?
Yeah, thank you so much, Sana. My name is Irene. I am an undergrad at Harvard studying computer science and African American studies as a combined joint concentration. I'm also the founder and product lead of the YX Foundation. We are a hybrid coalition design lab dedicated to prototyping at the intersection of machine learning and critical race theory. I have spent a lot of my life doing research around issues of racial injustice, but all of my work is gesturing towards coalition building across unlikely allyships. I was in high school not too long ago, and so I have a lot of empathy for the position that you guys are in, and I'm really excited to answer your questions. Thrilled and honored to be here. Thank you.
Thank you. And Michael, would you like to go next?
Thank you. I keep saying good morning, but I know it's good afternoon out on the East Coast. I'm Michael Drunkard. I'm in San Diego, California. And so welcome to everybody, and I appreciate the invitation to participate on this panel. Born and raised in Detroit, Michigan. I came out to San Diego in 1980 to coach basketball at San Diego State. Did that for 7 years. Prior to that, I was an assistant coach with the Detroit Pistons and 4 years at my alma mater, the University of Detroit. And if you follow basketball, I worked with a guy by the name of Dick Vitale for 6 years. But after leaving coaching in San Diego, I started the Police Athletic League, the PAL program that many of you on the East Coast are probably familiar with. And after 10 years of running that program, I was asked to join the YMCA of San Diego County, where I served as the executive director of the Jackie Robinson Family YMCA in southeastern San Diego, which is probably the most critical community in San Diego County. So it's this time of year that I always enjoy speaking about Black history. My history goes way back, including living through the riots in Detroit in 1967 and understanding what that was all about. But on January 4th, I retired from the YMCA of San Diego County after 23 years to refire with the Third Option City, which is a strategy to unite the country one city at a time by developing loving relationships, honoring our similarities, and celebrating our uniqueness. And so I'm thrilled to be doing that right now, and just really encouraged by the invitation to be here and to be able to serve on such an esteemed panel this afternoon.
Okay, thank you. We appreciate all of your time. So the first question I would like to direct to Chelsea. Your work really intersects with the realms of activism, international development, and youth mobilization. Working with organizations such as the United Nations and Girl Up, is being a Black professional in that industry different than your non-Black counterparts?
Thank you. Well, short answers, yes. But I think as a Black person, as a Black woman, entering any professional space, you are kind of balancing both the demands of the written job description the other kind of pieces of culture that goes into a job that will never be captured on a JD or job description, as well as your own kind of personal experience, your personal weight, and all the things that you bring into the office every day. Not to mention the biases and the ways in which folks treat you differently as well when you're entering that space. I think the development space, which I am no longer a part of, but used to be a part of, so the international development, kind of that global space especially, is really interesting and unique in that while through the nature of the name of the sector, you would think is diverse, right? Is actually extremely not only white, but of course, extremely Western, right? So we know that it's the US and other Western countries in Europe and Australia as well that are really pushing the conversation around development and pushing the conversation around kind of eradicating global poverty and those things. And we know that that's not a coincidence, right? These are the same actors in the same countries that were colonizing these same countries that they now want to support and help. So it's really complicated, right? And it's messy. And there's a lot of things that even in the way that we do the work that is really rooted in colonialism and in kind of harmful practices. So being a Black person, being a Black woman, also being a woman, my mother is a Latina, I identify as a Latina as well, someone who understands what it means, like the patterns of immigration, diaspora, all these messy things that can make it very difficult to be in that space. So ultimately, yes, it's very difficult, but it's needed, right? There needs to be a diverse perspective in that work, and really all types of work, but especially in the development space and in the activism space, right? Because ultimately the folks, I don't, this sounds very cliche in my space, but it might maybe not be as cliche here. So I'm gonna say this quote that they oversay, but they say the folks that are closest to the problem are closest to the solution. And again, super cliche, like everyone says that every day at work. So I'm kind of tired of saying it, but it's so true. And I think hopefully it rings true for the students listening. We need Black folks, we need other Black, brown, other formerly colonized folks at the space, at the table, to make sure when we're talking about issues of social justice, particularly in the global lens, that we're at the table guiding that conversation and making sure that we're not just replicating systems of harm. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much. I really think it's important that you brought in like colonization and diverse aspects, which is really interesting how you related that back. So thank you. Next, I'd like to go to Jeff about you just being a CEO of a startup company and working with Chicago scholars to help first generation high school students get into college. Have you ever felt like you experienced racism within your workforce? And if so, how did you approach it as a professional and how did it make you feel?
Oh man, so I probably can name a few times just in the 20 plus years of my career, but I'll take you all back to tech in the tech industry. So I own a company called Black Box Creative too. It is a web design and digital media company, and so I've worked with like everybody from Jimmy Butler of the Miami Heat and Mary and Maxwell and a lot of entertainers, but also a lot of organizations and companies that do social justice work in Chicago and across the country. I actually built Tuskegee University's website. And early on, especially when I first started, I would find that you would have these face-to-face meetings with potential customers and clients, and I'd walk in and you literally would see the shock and awe on their face. And you're 30 years old, you run a how much size company, how many employees, and you could feel that energy. I continue to persist. I think that the thing that even in that one time, I remember walking into a law firm here in Chicago, large law firm, 4 older white gentlemen were there. And we began to talk about, the website, and, I'm very detailed oriented. I had a full presentation, and then I'm leaving and I'm like, I'm headed to the Blackhawks game, to the box. We're going to watch the Hawks. And he's like, you like hockey? And I'm like, my partner at the time is like, yeah, man, Jeff's loved hockey since he was like 7 years old. Like not a fake hockey fan, like going back to like Wayne Gretzky, Luc Robitaille, the Red Wings, I can talk about the Russian line, like going into detail. And I felt that I diffused some of the angst and some of the preconceived ideas and stereotypes that they had built about me and probably shattered some stereotypes for them as well. And I think that oftentimes through conversation, we're able to shadow stereotypes. One of the things I worry about in the digital age and where we are right now with regard to what the pandemic is going to cause is that the relational proximity of being in front of someone and being able to have a conversation with someone to build relationship is much more difficult. And oftentimes we get on Zoom calls now and we're here to, do whatever we're going to do and then we move on from it. But that relational dynamic and the proximity is hard and hard to establish over Zoom. I try to build that in with my team and my staff at Chicago Scholars, that we still are able to sit and build those relational dynamics. We have something at Chicago Scholars called READY. It's our READY value, which stands for racial justice, equity, diversity, accessibility, and inclusion. And we started this journey a couple of years back. We wanted to make sure as an organization and our board of directors that we are modeling the same types of things that we are asking our corporate partners, our funders, and our mentors to do. And so it's not a set of values without teeth. We actually have measurements and qualitative measures, quantitative measures to make sure that we are doing what we're asking our partners to do. That means that it's times where we have to walk away from funders. Like there's companies we have to walk away from because if their values don't align with ours, if they're not trying to see the unique identities of all of our young people, then they're not a good partner for us. And I think, that's something that is difficult as a nonprofit. We're no money, no mission, right? But you have to put a flag in the sand and you have to begin to say, this is acceptable or this isn't.
Yes, thank you so much. And I definitely agree. It's extremely important to have that conversation to really eradicate those stereotypes in regards to race. Michael, you have made it your objective to become a strong ally for the Black community. From your work with the YMCA of San Diego County to being the CEO of Third Option City, an organization which strives for unity through our nation. Through your work, what made you decide that you wanted to be an ally for the BIPOC community?
Well, for me, it was easy because that community was so much of an ally for me growing up in Detroit. As I look around the room, and I'm sure those watching this panel right now, you probably are looking to say, well, what are they? I think it's easy to look at Jeff and probably say he's Black, right? And I think when we heard Chelsea talked about how she was mixed, and Irene will disclose what she is at some point, but all of my life, I remember being asked, what are you? And so I'm not Black, so I just want to let you know that. And I thought I was, up until this point, my mother's Sicilian, and my father, the man that raised me, is Irish, Scotch, and German until May 5th of 2020, 8 days before my 68th birthday, I learned that he was not my biological father. And thanks to Ancestry, I was able to determine who that was. And I'll disclose that later on as well. But when I look back at it, I remember at the time being the only what would be considered white family in an all Black neighborhood. But how those Black allies who took me under their wing and gave me guidance and counsel, and just, they couldn't care less what color I was. They just befriended me in ways I couldn't believe. And many of these allies ended up being in Hall of Fames. Dick Night Train Lane played for the Detroit Lions. And Melvin Franklin was the bass singer with the Temptations. He lived 2 houses from me. But then there was the Halls who lived next door, just the educators who, they took me under their wing. And then I was a paper boy, Mr. Morgan, who would always give me good guidance and counsel all the way along the way. And I think when I know that people are looking after you in that kind of way, it made it easy for me to understand how important it was for me to do the same. And then when you look back to the movement of the 60s and the 70s during the civil rights era, there were folks called the Freedom Riders. And the Freedom Riders rode from Detroit down south to march with Dr. King and to march with John Lewis. And some of them lost their lives, and they were embraced and they were never questioned and challenged. Well, you're white, you got to stand over here with your support. They stood arm in arm as they walked across the Pettus Bridge. They did those things. And I think that for me is a great example to see how easy it could be in spite of all that we're going through right now. And so those kind of conversations that you have just leave me to say that to be a good ally, I'm going to give you these three initials. It's called CCC. The first C stands for casual. The second C stands for connected. The third C stands for committed. And there's no way you're going to move from a casual relationship to a committed relationship if you're not somehow connected. And I think, to me, that's what allyship is all about, is are you a real friend? And is it only white people being allies to Black folks? But what if Black folks were allies to white people that could help them through that path to make them better understand how they too can be supportive in this arena?
Thank you. That was very insightful. I really appreciate it. Irene, I would like to direct my question to you now. You're in your last year of undergrad at Harvard, and you've accomplished quite a lot in your college trajectory with your organization, YX Foundation. With this being said, what was your journey from your academic career to your profession? Do you feel it was different due to your race? And if so, is that why you initiated your organization?
Yeah, thank you for that question. What was coming to mind as I was listening to the other panelists was what for me made me want so badly to work in this space. And that goes back to some experiences in middle school, actually. I remember when I was an 8th grader, that was when Black Lives Matter was first sort of taking off. And for me, my mother is an immigrant from Taiwan and my father is Native Hawaiian. And so I have a mix of both being someone who identifies as Asian American, but also understanding what's at stake when you are on settled lands, but also your lands have been settled by colonizers. And I found refuge in reading books, books, W.E.B. Du Bois, Franz Fanon, Michel Foucault, random things like this. I was a nerd growing up, I'll admit, and it seems like you guys are all nerds too if you go to Waldorf, which is a wonderful thing. You should own it. But I started to wonder why my other peers of Asian American descent in particular didn't feel like they had that much at stake in the Black Lives Matter movement, when for me, I always saw these fates as very intertwined. And there are plenty of quotes I can sort of point to that allude towards this. And so that was the beginning of it. But I think once you're a junior or a senior in high school, you get very caught up in wanting to be successful. And so I think for me, my journey has been one where I had been drawn in different directions because of pressures to, go to a certain school or want recognition for different sorts of, academic success, but then always going to bed and waking up in the morning tormented by this question of how are we going to liberate each other? How are we going to finally reach equal justice? Because this is what shaped my own life. And so YX was something that was born out of years of thinking about these issues and also doing work in them. And it was really only towards the last 2 years of my time at Harvard that I decided this was how I wanted to use my time. And, I'll get into a little bit more specifically what YX is doing, but I think one of the impetuses for starting it was observing how many college students who are interested in computer science pursue pipeline roles of being a product manager or software engineer at companies like Facebook, Amazon, Instagram, Twitter, and asking these college students, could you imagine a career for yourself that was both deeply technical and deeply committed to issues like racial justice? And overwhelmingly, the answer was no. And that was something that I wanted to solve for. Like, can we prove out a model where students who care about issues like racial injustice, who care about reducing police violence and mass incarceration, can use their technical abilities, their creative abilities, and also have a real career and work on those. So I think that's a bit of a high level for how I ended up where I am now, but it's certainly not an easy one. And being a young person often means navigating different pressures and also different desires. I think, social media is something else that I'll dive into a little bit later with how that might distort what seems like an interesting career path or livelihood. Yeah.
Yeah, thank you so much. And I think that's something we're all thinking about as high school students right now. So thank you for giving that insight. I would like to introduce our next panelist, Mr. Kevin Beckford. If you'd like to give a quick introduction of who you are and your work.
Sure. So first and foremost, Sonali, and everyone, thank you so much for for affording me the opportunity to speak with you today. I'm super excited to be here. I had a very serious work emergency to tend to, so my apologies for running late, but happy to be here. I'm Kevin Beckford. I'm a social entrepreneur and an education advocate. I am the co-founder of a nonprofit called the Hustlers Guild. It's a registered 501c3 organization that uses hip hop to expand opportunities for Black and Brown youth, primarily in Washington, D.C., in New York City, but across the country. We work with over 7,000 students to actualize opportunities for young people. I'm also the advancement manager for an organization called the Urban Assembly, which is a network of 23 schools. More or less, I'm a lobbyist. And so I yield political relationships and influence to bring about racial equity positions for Black and Latinx youth in New York City. There are 10,000 students served in that work. And prior to that, I had worked at the White House. I was a teacher after graduating college. And then I worked at the White House for a number of years, managing education at the within the correspondence office. So all of the work that I've done thus far, I'll just say in short, has been driven by a passion to expand and build opportunities for historically marginalized people at all intersections of identity. I'm from Camden, New Jersey. I was raised by my grandmother of Jamaican heritage. Very proud of that. In circumstances to which were especially challenging. And I always wondered, well, why this? You know, why me? Why us? Like, why is there this disparity, particularly among what Black and Brown folks experience in this country versus others, right? And so when I was to go to Yale University and have my first exposures to just a different way of learning and different structures of access and power, it became my mission to both dismantle those structures, right? But then also seek opportunities to build for access. And so this question of allyship, right? Like how to show up for others, how to show up for community is very important to the work that I do. And I caught it the tail of what Michael was sharing about that, right? And, you know, a lot of for me, being able to co-found a nonprofit, being able to essentially lobby within government, it's by proxy of building relationships, you know, in these spaces of access and privilege that I have later been afforded to in life, right? So I'm happy to, you know, delve into further as to, you know, what that will look like, but what that can look like. But I'll just say this, I kind of wasn't expecting it. You know, I am someone who just love to hook up people. I love to, you know, make sure everybody's good. That's my kind of my character, right? And, you know, I was meeting people along the way of work, building very genuine, compassionate relationships, you know, with friends and to which I was working with. And, you know, to, you know, years later upon leaving places like where I went to school, an Ivy League school, or, you know, place like the White House, I can still, you know, now look at such person and say, hey, you know, can you donate some money to this initiative that will, you know, service students, or hey, you are looking to pass this particular piece of legislation, right? Or you're looking for an expert. I'm happy to introduce you to someone, right? So allyship, I would just say this with allyship, it shows up in ways you probably wouldn't imagine. At least I didn't in life. And I'll just end there. Thank you so much, Sonali, again.
Yeah, just to go more in depth with your nonprofit work, with Hustler Guide, you expand spaces for Black and Latinx citizens. So what do you believe is truly needed to achieve racial equality within the future?
That's a great question. In order to achieve racial equality, I think a few things must happen, right? So first, the power structures that maintain white supremacy must be dismantled, right? And so there are a lot of systems that don't quite work right now. Those things have to be re-examined, reimagined, and rebuilt. I also think simultaneously, access must be expanded to people, especially those who have been historically marginalized. And so, you know, resources have to be redistributed. Programs that orient to equity must be created, right? And so with the Hustlers Guild, for example, we purposely work with Black and Brown youth who are living in communities below the poverty line, in part because, in many of the, communities, tell you a story about a young man who, was a brilliant graphic designer, lived, Facebook headquarters was like within walking distance. And he was like, oh, I had no idea Facebook was here. And I didn't know Facebook could hire someone like me, right? And so part of the work we do is like, oh, okay, let's educate you on that, and let's get you exposed, and let's, build that pipeline to that opportunity, to that access, right? So this amazing, talented young man who now actually is interning with Sony Music, didn't even know that there was a whole industry that to which he could thrive within. And so that's what we kind of try to do, is build that access. And so say two things: dismantle the power structures that keep inequities persisting, and then also to expand access to those who have been historically marginalized.
That's amazing. Thank you so much. That is extremely important. Michael, I would like to ask you, in what ways do you believe being an ally has helped you in your career?
Okay, that's me. Okay. Where it's helped me is everybody needs a corner person. And I don't know how many of you have been involved in sports, but one of my heroes growing up was Muhammad Ali. And if you ever watched him fight, there would be this guy in his corner that would always be hounding up, you can do it, champ. You can win, champ. You can do it. And his name was Boudini Brown. And he was with him all throughout his career. But it always resonated with me how important it is to have somebody in your ear telling you something that's aspirational, not telling you can't do it, or you can't be it, and you can't make it happen. And I know for me, that was what I had growing up in Detroit. And I keep going back to that, is those old folks in the neighborhood that just kept telling me I could be the first in my family to go to college, not only go to college, but graduate from college. And that, when I started coaching at the University of Detroit, my alma mater, I was a political science major. I had a scholarship to go to law school, but I was told that I could go into coaching and I could do something with it. And I ended up doing something with it as well. And as I listen to our other panelists right now, and I have in my comments too about allyship, but also when you think about the Black professional, you're looking at folks right now, and I think in the Black world, there's a difference between being a Black professional who is an owner, an operator, an entrepreneur, and versus what we could probably call the help. Because we know that some folks are hired into companies, into a position, but it's not Black owned. They're playing a role. And when you talk about institutional racism, they've been watching it throughout their entire career and couldn't affect it. And I think that's what's changing right now, is everybody's now begging for solutions on how can you make it happen, when possibly they had the allies sitting in the room with them all this time that could tell them exactly what you have to do to make it better, not only for the workplace, but for the community that you serve. And when you think about those Black professionals, you think about, well, where do you live? Do you even live in a Black community anymore? Or where do you serve? Are you serving those interests? When we just heard right now what Kevin talked about, he's raising money not for himself, he's raising money for his mission to help others. When you listen to Jeff talk about what he's doing, he's graduating kids that normally wouldn't graduate in the traditional school setting. And so he's making an impact in those kind of ways. And those are where the solutions lie. And I think those allies are out there right now, and they do want to make things happen in a positive way. Even the biggest Detroit example I could give you is if you're a fan of Motown music, Berry Gordy owned Motown. That was a Black-owned company. And look how many Black-owned superstars and professionals spun out of that industry right there. But he's a shrewd businessman. I know if you know anything about business, Barry was very shrewd. He left Detroit, he went to LA, he made that move and left a whole lot of acts back in the city, right? And so they were either made it or they had to sign up with somebody else. But when you think about what you do as a business person, what kind of impact are you truly making? At the Jackie Robinson YMCA, there was a quote he said, that will always resonate with me. He said, a life is not important except for the impact it has on other lives. He didn't say on other Black lives, he said other lives. And this is where everybody has an opportunity to do that for all of mankind, for all of humanity.
Thank you. And Jeff, I would like to ask you a similar question. Do you believe that allyship has helped you in any aspects of your career? And how did it help you, if so?
Oh yeah, I mean, I think going back to high school, I went to a predominantly white high school here in Chicago called Marian Catholic. It was a private school. I remember walking on the campus of that school and coming from the south side of Chicago. Neither one of my parents went to college. It was a unique experience. Like, you know, all the kids there were driving cars that were well above like my pay grade. Everybody had, you know, a lot of money there, a lot of affluent people. And it was allies there, even in high school, that kind of helped me through navigating that environment. I remember I was always great with computers. So my undergrad is actually in computer science, and I was a computer engineer for a while before shifting gears. I started that journey when I was a sophomore in high school. I stepped in the room. I didn't have a computer at home, and I still remember his name. Chris Milianta gave me a computer, which back then was a big gift. He had extra ones around. He had built one. And, you know, allyship, like true friendship. When I got to Mizzou, undergrad, University of Missouri, I was on the engineering floor. And again, you know, going in engineering classes, and you see often that you're one of very few people of color, especially Black men. You know, I was able to befriend folks who would share, you know, they were part of white fraternities where they had files of the old tests, and they would share those with me. And I think that those kinds of just simple gestures of allyship kind of helped get me into my career. Even now, the founder of Chicago Scholars is a man by the name of Tim Schwartfigger. Tim was CEO of Nuveen Investments. So, you know, assuming, just looking at his golden parachute package when he left and retired was, you know, $60-70 million. Tim is very well to do. Tim calls, he looks out for me, he helps me navigate some of the systems that we're trying to dismantle through Kevin's work here in Chicago. Because right now my job is to kind of navigate those systems to bring resources into the house for our scholars. And Tim continues to open doors that, you know, from the economic club to other parts of Chicago that have been closed off to, in particularly young people of color. And so those people are in my life are ones I can name out. You know, when I think about the why behind why they did it, I think it goes back to Michael's point around the 3 C's. Before Chris was going to give me a computer, we connected. It started casual, based in the relationship around, you know, computers. And there's an initiative in Chicago going on right now called P33. So the Pritzker family, who own the Hyatt hotels, have put a lot of money into trying to like create spaces for equity. Recently, they started P33. And I walked into the room of P33 and I explained to them, they were like, what do we need to do, Jeff? Can you help us get more, build more pathways to young students of color in technology? And I shared with them, like, as a former basketball player, you know, I didn't love tech because somebody forced me to sit in front of a computer. I loved tech because I would play video games on computers with my friends. Just like I love basketball because we went outside and picked up a ball and played pickup. It wasn't because somebody put me in a training program and said, you're going to be a basketball player. And I think going back to my earlier point, allyship is rooted in relationship. You have to have a connection. You have to be centered in a connection. Now, again, there are barriers and walls being built all over our country that are prohibitive to forming and developing relationships. And that's where the work that each of you at the school, like, you all are the future of that. So if you don't know somebody in your class that you've been going to school with, I know many of you probably gone to school from kindergarten through, like, reach out, have a conversation, just start there. Because I think that's what we've gotten away from as a country. And then we built walls around it. I'm polarized in this side of the world. I'm polarized here, when, you know, and that's going to take some work to overcome, but I think we can do it by, you know, relationship, casual, connected, committed.
Thank you so much. And I love how you use the 3 C's to describe that, and how you described how allyship brought you to where you are now. That was so important, and thank you for that. Chelsea, I'd like to ask you the next question. How can we educate people on a larger scale about the Black experience in the educational system and or the workforce?
Sure. If I may, I want to just add another point on allyship, and I think it will potentially segue well into the question around kind of integrating kind of Black experience in education. I really enjoy the 3 C's. I love anytime you can kind of like easily teach somebody something. So I really enjoy the 3 C's, and I really enjoy the distinction and the emphasis on creating connection. I think where I personally really value allyship, and where I look to many of my both white colleagues, friends, community members, but also my other non-Black people of color, again, colleagues, friends, community members, to do is kind of go beyond this idea of befriending me or being friendly with me. Because I think I think I'm a pretty friendly person. I get along with most people, so it's not necessarily hard to be my friend. But what it might be harder to do is to actually be committed to my liberation, right? Or actually be committed to tearing down systems that ultimately oppress me, right? And in many ways also oppress those who are my allies, right? So I want to just say, like, I think, allyship is being able to recognize injustice, and it's being able to step up to the plate and support the folks who are most affected by that injustice, right? And in many ways, right, I think about like, I know most of you are in high school, but I've been to plenty of protests with young people there, especially my climate protests. Y'all are out there, but also many of the protests as well around racial injustice. And then this is not a call to say all y'all should protest. Get your parents' permission, do what you feel comfortable with. But I think about oftentimes when we saw photos of white folks that were there at the protesting, quite literally putting their bodies in front of other folks of color. And while that is both a very literal, physical manifestation of what allyship looks like, it's also very much like a metaphysical, right? Or like a metaphor for what allyship can be, right? So we know that when we're protesting, Black folks, brown folks are going to be most likely to be arrested or targeted by the police. I mean, we know that case to be anywhere, wherever they go, right? So by a white person or by a non-Black person of color being able to literally step in between the police and people of color, that is allyship, right? That is probably one of the more dramatic forms of allyship. Another great example of allyship that came up recently for me, which I don't think we should be like applauding this guy too much, like don't get me wrong here, but I hope y'all know who Serena Williams is. I mean, I assume y'all do. And Serena Williams is married to a man by Alexis Ohanian, something. I'm sorry if I'm butchering his name. We'll just call him Serena Williams' husband, right? So this guy, as y'all probably know, is like a billionaire. He like founded Reddit, and he's out here, right? He's super successful. So recently he stepped down from the board of the Reddit organization, Reddit corporation, whatever, and specifically said, I want you to use this now like empty board space and make sure that you put I don't know his exact quotes, but I'm pretty sure he said put a Black person or put a person of color, right? And in many ways, like he was super applauded, right? Like, oh my God, you're giving up power and you're making sure folks of color are be able to step into that power. I'm like, don't get me wrong, that's great. And I think it's a really great example, right? And a lot of times we talk about fighting injustice in the sense of like, it's not about giving up your power. It's about, pulling more seats at the table. That's just not true, right? Ultimately, in some cases, as an ally, you will be put in positions where you need to quite literally give up your seat to allow another person who is more closely either affected by the issues or who's underrepresented in that space to be able to step up as a leader. So I will say, particularly as I said to the white students that are listening, as well as to the non-Black folks of color, and that includes my Latinos. I know we got to hear it. There are times where we're going to need to step back and allow Black folks to lead, or step back and allow other marginalized folks, whether due to their gender, whether due to their sexuality, their class, et cetera, right, and to make sure that we're challenging ourselves, because friendliness is beautiful. And I really do believe that personal connection and relationships can change the world. But I got a lot of friends. I got a whole lot of friends. I do not have a whole lot of allies. And I need more allies, and we need more allies. So I really want to encourage the folks that are listening to step up. And I'm sorry, Sanaa, because I know that did not answer your question. So real quickly, I'm going to answer your other question around integrating the Black experience in the education system. Okay. So number one, I mean, the obvious answer, right, is to make sure that Black history is taught, right? I went to a predominantly Black high school in Jersey, and not South Jersey though, Kevin, I'm in North Jersey, but went to a predominantly Black high school in Jersey. But most of my teachers were white, and Black history was almost never taught, right? There was no Black history class. There was no, I knew nothing, right? So most of my education around the Black experience was taught to me either by family members, those family reunions in the summer do a lot for teaching Black kids about their history, because that was where a lot of my teaching came from. And then of course from movies, right? And from entertainment, which is just not enough, right? We need to make sure that we are integrating in curriculum from kindergarten, preschool really, and all folks should be able to go to preschool for free, but that's another story. From preschool onwards, making sure that we're talking about Black history and Black experience, and making sure we're talking about Black experience outside of the monolith, right? So we know that many of the awesome people making history right now, many of them are immigrants or children of immigrants, right? So we need to be making sure that we're talking about the Black diaspora and Black history in all of its ways. So that just needs to happen at the curriculum level and in the school system. And we also need to be making sure on that point that we're teaching teachers to do that as well. So my mom was a teacher. She's now an administrator. My aunt's a librarian. My sister's a preschool teacher. I come from from educators. And we need to make sure that when they're going through their own, master's programs and undergrad programs, that they're teaching, they're being taught about Black history, taught about cultural competencies, and making sure that that's also part of their training, so that then when they get into positions of power, right, which is being at the front of the classroom is a really powerful opportunity, that they're making sure that they're teaching us our history. And then as far as in the workforce go, that's a whole nother answer that I will not answer today, or not answer in this snippet. And I yield my time, and I'm sorry for taking up maybe more than I was allotted.
No, thank you so much for that. That was very powerful, especially the examples you provided. Thank you very much. Kevin, I know you wanted to touch on one of the points she was bringing up.
Yes, thank you so much, Sonali. I'll be brief. I very much appreciated, Chelsea, your comments with around allyship, and just wanted to offer two concrete examples as to what it can look like, right? Very excited about this conversation, by the way, if you can't tell by my smile and emojis being used in the chat. But one example, the network I work with, the Urban Assembly, for the past 4.5 years was led by a phenomenal leader, a white woman who comes from considerable money. She's fantastic at her job in many ways, and at some point saw that, in order for racial equity to advance amongst the organization, that there needed to be some cultural and organizational shifts, and made room for a Black man to step into that role, someone whose consciousness and commitment to racial equity in education and fluency would further that agenda, right? And so that's not to necessarily, dance and give full credit, for one person doing this thing, but just to offer that as an example, right, as to what allyship can look like. Sometimes it is in fact relinquishing what is within positionality. I'll just share myself, for example, that even comes into play at times, right? And so, I grew up poor, Black man, now make decent money. Not rich, but I'm okay. But there have been opportunities to which have been presented to me, and I've realized my positionality as someone who experiences and lives a certain class, in a certain class, it it's detracting. Someone else could offer perspective, right? And so sometimes I get offers for interviews, radio and TV interviews, and it's like, you know what, this isn't really my experience to share. Like, while it'd be nice to be on, you know, Fox 5 or ABC, there's someone else who can speak more authentically to that experience. And so let me turn to this other, you know, person, you know, Black person who may have a, you know, another intersecting identity that may be more relevant, right? So upholding space for like Black trans and non-binary folk, for example, or again, or someone coming from a different class. That's another example, right, of of how you can show up as an ally. Thank you so much, Sonali.
Thank you. I really appreciate that too. Irene, I would also like to ask you if you would like to touch on this point, but also if you can answer how allyship can impact a community and how one can be a strong ally.
Definitely. It's Chelsea and Kevin gave so many incredible examples. And one thing I was thinking about is how I felt when I was in high school. And it's probably hard to imagine right now that you'll be in these positions where you have immense power or wealth, because you're like, I just have to get through my calc homework. But some things that come to mind that I think will actually be very relevant, either proximate maybe tomorrow or in a couple of years when you're in college, are a lot of social situations that you'll find yourself in. You know, for me, being on campus at Harvard, sometimes what you're giving up is your social capital. And so, you know, there are some organizations on Harvard's campus that are, you know, historically centers for a lot of wealth and power. And it's very desirable to want to be a part of those spaces. And one of the decisions you might have to make if you want to be not just an ally, but go from being an ally to sort of an accomplice, you know, what are you going to do to shift the status quo, is not be, like disaffiliate, not be a part of that organization, and be brave enough to say that and say why. And in some instances, that's not the cool thing to do. But if you care about justice, if you care about not just standing alongside, but being willing to dismantle the structures, you have to do those things. And so I can think of examples in high school of you maybe being the only one willing to speak up and call someone out for something, but like those are examples or instances where you can begin to practice what that means to put yourself on the line and take a risk. So there's something there. I think some two other things I want to talk about in regards to allyship, particularly for young people, is one, the difference between allyship and performative allyship. And I think social media is becoming a huge platform for young people to experiment with allyship. But what that ends up looking like is, you know, sharing a post, posting an image of a Black square, putting in your bio that you're an ally, like claiming a title when you actually have to earn it. And that's something I see so much with young people. And what I wish I could better communicate is exactly what Chelsea said. Like, are you actually giving something up in doing that? Or is it because of clout? Like that right now, or I think over the past 6 months, it became very cool for Gen Z to be involved in activism. And I'm so excited to see that becoming more normal and celebrated. But that also meant that, you know, we started to see a lot of young people performing the motions, you know, posting the things, posting a photo at a protest. But when it counted, when you're on the line, not stepping up to the plate. So that's something I want to flag. And then I think the other thing too is there have been some amazing examples of white allies giving up a spot or doing something to be a great ally to a person of color. But what's often not talked about, but is very uncomfortable when you're in that situation, is this sort of feeling that that person is a savior. And I want to call that out too, because being an ally I try not to approach opportunities to be an ally as a moment to be a hero or be a savior. And something I see among a lot of young people who want to make a positive change is a great example at Harvard is there are a lot of students who start nonprofits and organizations, and oftentimes they're actually ego projects. It's cool to be the founder of something, but I often urge people, and this is very true for YX, spend a lot of time examining and understanding the problem, and then checking to see if other people are already working towards solving that. Maybe they're better suited to solve that problem than you are. And usually if you earnestly address that, you might come to realize that the more honest and efficient solution is to give your resources to them and to not take the spotlight, and to not be the savior, and to try and interrogate why it is that you wanted to step in as a hero. And so I think those are two very complicated things, but as young people in particular, when we have Instagram and TikTok and Twitter at our fingertips, the glory of being on the front lines without doing the frontline work is really, really desirable. And so that's something I would want to call attention to the young people in the room.
Yes, thank you so much for that. I think performative activism and just savior complex within activism is really something that needs to be discussed more. So thank you for presenting us with that. I know we have a few more minutes until we open up the Q&A, but I'd just like to ask all of you a question if you can briefly answer. In your perspective, what makes for an inclusive and welcoming community? So Michael, if you would like to start first and just briefly say, and we can go around.
Well, it's like this call today, I think you've got to respect everybody's opinion and everybody's position. And we're hearing a lot about that right now. There's some things that have been said here right now that I may not agree with, but they've all been said before. And I put some things in the chat for everybody that's on board. Having been at the Jackie Robinson YMCA for 22 years, I learned a lot about the man, but I don't know how many of you know that he wrote letters to 4 presidents. So when you talk about your voice, what are you doing with it? And at the end of the day, when it comes to allyship, you got to answer the so what question. I like what Irene said, you can get out there and march, you can do all that, but then it's like the flavor of the month. Where are you next month? What are you doing now? And for folks that have been in the trenches for a long, long time, that you got to give them some honor and respect as well. They've been doing it for a long time. So take an opportunity to read those letters that I put in the chat from Jackie Robinson. His first letter was written to Eisenhower in 1958, and his last letter was written in 1972, shortly before he died. And that's the quote I want to close with right now, where he said, "Black America has asked so little, but if you can't see the anger that comes from rejection, you are treading a dangerous course. We older Blacks, unfortunately, were willing to wait. Today's young Blacks are ready to explode. We better take some definitive action, or I'm afraid the consequences could be nation shattering. I hope you will listen to the cries of the Black youth. We cannot afford additional conflict." That was written in 1972, and I'm not sure if things have changed since then. So this is why the need for this conversation, and for everybody that's listening and watching right now, needs to make a commitment to making a difference, to make an impact. I believe you can.
Thank you. Jeff, would you like to go next and answer what makes an inclusive and welcoming community?
Yeah, I love Michael's quote, and I think that echoes a lot of the same sentiment that I would say. But I think even beyond that, I would doing the simple things. It seems like it's obvious, but oftentimes it's not. I even find with my staff, like we want to go big, and systems change work. The work we're talking about doing is like systems change, root things, breaking down systemic racism and barriers. That's a long play. And I think that just being okay knowing that I'm going to throw this rock in the water, and at the ripple at the other end, I may never see where that's going, where that ripple will end and land, but I need to keep throwing rocks of positivity, rocks of allyship, rocks of hope, rocks of support, rocks of stepping back when I need to, rocks of stepping up when I need to. I think that we have to be okay knowing that, I a long time ago, I thought I wanted to be like Black Bill Gates and work in tech and change the world from that perspective. That money was going to be it. And, 10 years ago, I said, nope, it's going to be education and working with young people, right? Knowing that I may never be ultimately super wealthy, but that the things that I want to do and commit to are in the now. And so the little things, I'm going to throw as many rocks, and I encourage you all to start throwing rocks, keep throwing rocks. By putting this together today, your classmates, you all threw rocks, positive rocks, and connecting each of us, you threw a positive rock. And I'm grateful for it.
Thank you so much for that insight. Irene, would you like to go next?
Yeah, I think that there are two things that immediately come to mind in what makes a welcoming and inclusive community. I think the first one is practicing and expressing radical empathy. And that's something that you guys can already do in your classrooms in school. Empathy is something that is hard to explain and understand, but I think listening earnestly and asking the right questions, and the right question can start with forming that relationship like we talked about before, just opening a conversation. And then I think the second thing is prioritizing impact over intent. And that goes back to some of the aspects of performative allyship I was just talking about. There have been many times in my life I intended to do the right thing and intended to be an excellent ally or an excellent accomplice, but it didn't land well. Maybe I created more harm than good. And I had to hold myself accountable to that, own up to the impact, and then try and remediate and do better next time. And that's okay. I think when you're young, it's easy to get discouraged, or you might feel like, oh, this is an impossible task. How, everyone wants me to do this, and I have to say the right things, and if not, I'm going to get canceled, and all of this, 21st century unique, mud that we're all pushing through. But show up the next day, try again, mean well, assume best intentions, but then also hold yourself accountable for what you do create.
Yes, thank you so much for that. And Chelsea, would you like to go next?
Sure. I love that radical empathy. That's beautiful. So I would say maybe 3 things. So first, I'd say humility, which I think, to the point of Irene just made, is walking into any space, any community, with a sense of humility and knowing that we're all experts in some things and we're also all learners, right? We're always going to be learning and doing better. And we should know that we will inevitably mess up, right? So it's not about if, it's about when we mess up, right? And knowing that that's okay and that's going to happen. And we enter that space as humble folks, ready to continue to learn and build. I think on that point, perhaps the second would be accountability, right? Making sure that if we want to truly create an inclusive and welcoming community, that we have space to hold each other accountable, right? And doing so in an empathetic way, right? Doing so in one that's rooted in love. I know that might sound weird to high school students, like, why is she talking about love? But I think that the politics of love, and for folks who read more stuff from MLK, from Martin Luther King Jr., as well as Bell Hooks, for any folks who may have read her. I never heard of her in high school, so I don't expect y'all to. But really, approaching accountability from a place of love. And then lastly, which is my favorite one, and I enter all spaces with this, right? Like a deep commitment to truth telling, right? So much of what we've been fed is lies, right? So much of what we will experience in the world is people, we use the term gaslighting a lot, which, like, what does that even mean? But basically, like, folks trying to say that what your experiences aren't true, right? And also in the sense of politeness, right? People say, no, we can't say that. No, we can't hold that truth because that might hurt this person's feelings, or that's not the right way to, we don't want to deal with conflict, right? But in reality, we need to be deeply committed to telling the truth, telling our truths, our own personal truths, as well as the truth of our communities, and the truth of just the matter. And I think if we continue to walk towards truth while holding our humility and while also holding a sense of accountability, I think that is where we'll ultimately find inclusive spaces and ways that we can more effectively walk towards liberation.
Yeah, thank you so much. That was very impactful. And Kevin, would you like to end us off with your perspective on what makes an inclusive and welcoming community?
Sure, I'm incredibly inspired by all of the aforementioned points and would agree with all of them. I think in order to create inclusive communities, we must lead with love. Love is the answer. I think when we, I think there's so many things from which derive from that, right? The ability to be empathetic, the ability to listen, the ability to hold accountable, all of those things are byproducts of love. And so I think it's important to have a heart of love when you are seeking to build and to build community. I also think belonging is important, right? And so folks should be free, folks should be comfortable, folks should be able to be unapologetically them in a space, right? And so for me, an inclusive community is one in which, for example, you don't have to code switch, you can kind of just say like, this is who I am, and that be accepted and embraced and loved. Some of the previous speakers said this, but accountability, right? I think it's just imperative that we, for the safety of spaces and for the growth of each other, that we hold each other accountable rather, but we do so with grace, right? We hold space for grace, and we hold space for forgiveness, and the space for understanding. In this current climate to which we live, there's, cancel culture, for example. And sometimes, some things need to be canceled. There's some things is like, what, you're going too far. Like, we can't have that for this, for this community. But a lot of times it's like we can bridge understanding, misunderstanding, right? So let's leave room for grace whenever possible. And the final thing I would say is uplift, right? And so we should orient ourselves to lifting each other up. Like when someone falls down in the community, helping them up, like get up. And so an inclusive community is one to which we recognize we're all going to have our moments. We're all people, but let's build each other up. So I think those 5 things to me are reflective of an inclusive community, right? So that's love, belonging, accountability, grace, and uplift.
Well, thank you so much, all of you, for your impactful words and for taking the time to speak with us. We greatly appreciate your time. I will pass on the next section to Zamia for the Q&A.
All right. I just want to say thank you again for all your words and advice. And I was truly inspired by this, and I know a lot of other people are. And I just want to open the chat to any questions anyone might have that they want to ask the panelists. For people that are in schoolrooms, I would say raise your hand, the blue hand, have someone in the room raise the blue hand and ask to come up and speak and ask your question. So that's what I will share right now. Anyone want to ask questions or to the panelists? Don't be afraid. It's okay. Well, I think I have one question. I just wanted to know, out of everything that's happening, has happened the past year, and, we see that there's a recurrence of discriminations against multiple ethnic groups. And as a rising Black woman, I've seen how that has affected me and people around me. I just wanted to ask how Black people or someone like me could be an ally to other people of color.
I'm happy to answer that. I've actually had a lot of people in the last few days reach out and ask me about this, in particular in regards to violence against Asian Americans, backlash due to COVID-19. And my response is sort of what being a good ally looks like is the same as everything that we've just described. And the hope that I expressed for the Asian American community was, show up for your Black brothers and sisters, and then, hope that they do the same. And so, for example, if you're out on the street and you see someone shout, for example, at an Asian American person, and this actually happened to me the other day. I was walking through Boston, not shouted at me, but there was an elderly Chinese man, and there were 2 people on the street who just started shouting slurs at him. And I for a moment sort of looked around just to check, like, in terms of safety, if there's any sort of immediate thing I need to make a decision around, but waited for someone to say something, and no one did. There's a name for this phenomenon where everyone assumes someone else is going to do something. I wish I could remember what it was. And so in that moment, I physically stepped in front of this man and said, please stop. Like, this is incredibly inappropriate and racist. And it was a scary moment. I remember, like, my hands were shaking and I was scared for my own safety. But even that one small act kind of scared that person. They didn't expect someone to speak up, and then they stopped and walked away. And so it's everything we just described, but just doing it for your other, brothers and sisters, the other folks out there who may be endangered right now. Yeah.
Thank you. I know that someone in the senior class has a question, so if you would come up and ask your question.
Hello. Wait, can you hear me? Oh, okay. Hi. So I had a question regarding um, just spreading messages, kind of like when it comes to things such as cultural appropriation. For me, I know that I have a hard time explaining why it's so negative because I haven't been affected by it as much as say my parents. How would you like suggest that what are like the best ways to go about explaining why things like that are so negative, even though they might not affect the people in the room or something?
That's a tough question, and I don't want to take up more airtime, but what I will say is one example of a very frequent cultural case of cultural appropriation that I think some people don't realize is an example of this is like Hawaii themed parties. And I can speak on that as a Hawaiian person, or like Hawaiian shirt parties, tiki style parties. And I think there's so many parties like this in college. So I deal with this a lot. And the response I often get from my peers is like, oh, we love Hawaii. Like, it's such a cool place. We're just celebrating it. Like, of course, we don't mean any harm. And usually one of the most powerful ways I use to try and explain why it's actually quite harmful is storytelling. And of course, you don't always have time to sit down and tell them like a whole hour-long story, but Native Hawaiian people, in the case of surfing, for example, I'm actually a really big surfer. I don't know if any of you guys like surfing, but when the white missionaries first arrived on the islands, they were banned from surfing. Surfing was almost like a religious practice for them, and it was seen as very primitive. And in addition to being banned from surfing, couldn't speak their native language. And then you look at today, surfing has been appropriated as a sort of iconic white culture type thing. Southern California, you see the blonde white guys surfing. And it's harmful in part because this is something that for a Native Hawaiian person, they otherwise would not receive praise for. If anything, were formerly oppressed for and subjugated for. And so it erases that really, really important history. And it's not just history, there were tangible economic and political consequences of that remain today. A lot of Native Hawaiian people on the Hawaiian Islands continue to live in poverty. And it can all be traced back to a lot of the structural and policy decisions that were made way back in the late 1800s, but also when the United States went on to annex Hawaii as a state. So that's one example, I think, that can be helpful. I'll pass it off to Kevin.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Irene. If I may just very quickly, that's an amazing question. And that was one for great introspection for me. So thank you for it. I'd say, as someone who's of Jamaican heritage, I respond to moments as such by leading in with love and accountability. Right. So I think back to the times to which I've been offended by. It's like, hey, yeah, man, wagwan, where's the spliff? Where's all these different things? And I'm like, hello, like, nice to see you too. Like, I think about how it makes me feel, you know what I mean, to kind of have like your culture, or your language and effects of it misunderstood. And so I generally am someone who embraces love and accountability. I'll let someone know like, hey, this is how it makes me feel, when you said that, or when you did this. But in doing so in a way that's diplomatic and, to the extent that I have capacity to, with grace, with kindness. And so that's a really amazing question, I just want to say, and I'm going to think on it some more, but yeah.
Great. Our next question is from anonymous person. The question is, many people in the BIPOC communities believe that mental health does not exist. Do you agree or disagree? And if you agree, what instance in your educational or occupational journey did you realize your mental health may have been affected by a certain situation?
Happy to jump to that question. Another amazing question. And I'll be brief. I think that there are in fact stigmas across multiple cultures when it comes to accessing mental health, right? And it's just been in recent mental health resources, and it's just been in recent times to which we have embraced across cultures a commitment or an interest in pursuing these resources. I'll also say that a lot of it is systemic as well, right? And so having lack of access to these resources has informed and colored a lot of the thinking around accessing them. I work in the education space primarily, and I was like, when I started teaching, I was overwhelmed and kind of shocked by how many students would come to me and be like, I need someone to talk to, I need to work through this problem. Right. And so, but I don't know where to go. Like, I don't have the tools. And so I would say yes and no. Like, historically, for sure, there are some ideas around access to mental health services um, that are historical, but then, a lot of young people, youth today, they're looking for these resources, but can our systems provide them? Right. In terms of when I realized like I started seeing a therapist when I started working at the White House. So I used to work. I worked in a correspondence office, and for a time, I actually managed the threats portfolio. So all the sensitive correspondence. So like when people threatened the first family or the president, I would read through that stuff. And believe it or not, President Obama had more threats than any other president combined. And so it took a toll on my spirit. I was like broken. I did not want to go into work. When I was done, I would just be depleted. And I was like, I have to maintain for myself. Like I have to take care of myself. And I'm so grateful I made that investment from that point forward, and seeing a therapist consistently and just doing things that built myself up and oriented to self-care.
If I could add too, as long as the system is a sick care system and not a health care system, these things are going to exist. And so, especially in communities of color, just look at COVID, for example. When you look at who's the last to get the vaccine, who doesn't know about it, everybody's racing to get the vaccine, but you got to go online. You have to have a computer, you got to have internet. But in some communities of color, that's not going to happen, especially if you don't speak the language, you see. So when it comes to mental health, the other side of this too is in many communities of color, for so long, they've avoided that is a reality, that there's so many things that go on from a mental health perspective. You just try and battle through it, you fight through it, you get tough, but in reality, that's not going to be the solution at all. And especially if you don't have the resources or the income or the insurance to get that kind of counseling that's needed, that's where it's really becomes a tough situation. So as young people, I'm so proud of my son's fiance, who's she's a neuroscience, a doctoral candidate at UCSD. She'll be going to Emory University to do her internship, but her whole thing is working with epilepsy in communities of color. And so these are brain diseases that she's laser focused on at a young age right now. And I'm talking to all the students right there. If you're not sure what you really want to do, mental health is a field that is wide open for folks, especially when you're dealing with communities of color, because we've got to find a solution.
That's great. I totally understand that. I know we have another question from the 8th grade. I didn't forget about y'all, but I could read it out loud. This comes from a student. How do I, as a Black person, educate others on police brutality? For example, I was talking to someone who was white and trying to explain to them that Black Blacks are targeted by police. However, they didn't believe me. How do you respond to that?
I want to jump in here, and I'll answer this question, and then I'll try to also add something to the previous question as well. First and foremost, I want to let every person on this call that is marginalized in any way, whether by gender, race, etc., it is not your job to teach other people about your oppression. It's just not, right? Like, oftentimes we feel this great weight of feeling like we need to teach everybody, and it's not your job. Okay, like, you are allowed to walk away from a conversation and say, I don't talk about this. I want to talk about this new TikTok dance, or I want to talk about nothing, you know? So like, I want you to know this, because I struggle with this every day, like all the time. It's not my job. Although I do work in criminal justice reform, so it might kind of be my job sometimes. So maybe that's not really true. And I think to the point around self-care as well, is being able to recognize when conversations don't serve you, right? And when this is actually not going to be a productive space. Okay, so I think you said this is an 8th grader. I mean, whew, like the heaviness, right? That's not fair. And I saw a clip from the actor's name, Daniel Kaluuya. I'm sorry if I pronounced that incorrectly. It was his birthday yesterday too. Okay, sorry. I might have like a small crush on him. Let me stop. Anyway, he said this really great quote about like, why do I need to tell white people about racism? They created it. They do it. Like, why is it my job, right? I might be butchering that quote, but it was some version of that. And it was really deep to me, right? And I think we need to recognize that there are times where we want to engage in these conversations, but we are not obligated to every day. But to answer your question more explicitly, I think if you feel inclined to engage in that conversation, or if you feel really inclined to educate someone, you know, there are so many great movies. There are so many great documentaries. There's so much great kind of like simple art that folks can engage with to learn about these issues, right? And most folks have Netflix these days. 13th is a great documentary that was produced by Ava DuVernay, who I think most of y'all know, like Selma did that other Disney movie, I don't know. Anyway, so I think being able to say, hey, you should really check out this film, or hey, I don't know if y'all listen to podcasts, if y'all too young for that, I don't know, but hey, check out this podcast. Find ways that you can actually point folks to resources, so that it's not you don't necessarily need to write your thesis to them. And then I think, you know, ultimately, depending on who this person is to you, being able to say like, look, if you're my friend, or if you're somebody who cares about me, I need you to believe me. I need you to trust my experiences. I need you to trust my family's experiences. And while, you know, we might be getting different lessons, or we might be hearing different information, ultimately, you should trust me when I tell you that these things are true. But again, you're in 8th grade. It's not your job to teach anybody about police brutality. It's really not. I honor you, and I'm so grateful that you asked this question and that you feel that weight, but I want to take that weight off of you. And if somebody else asks you that, you can give them my email and I will talk to them for you. Okay? I'm dead serious too. I will give everyone my email, my personal email as well, and I can talk to them. And we can also point to teachers and other great community members that can help guide these really tough conversations with other folks. And I saw a question in the chat about LGBT folks, especially, and them being at risk. And I don't mean to jump to that question, but I think as we think particularly about police brutality as well, is we know that trans folks, especially trans Black women, especially, are extremely targeted by the police. And the stats are true, they're real, they're there. And I do want to make sure that we're uplifting that. And I think if you are a cis person, regardless of your race, if you are a person who does not identify as gay or as queer, it's also your responsibility to uplift those stories, uplift those names, right? For folks who've been to protests, we often will hear names shouted out, and we don't hear other names, and we have to question why, right? And we need to make sure that we're uplifting their stories as well. And that's on all of us, right? And especially of us who who identify as cis, or who identify as non-queer, are non-gay, et cetera, et cetera. But yeah, my heart is so heavy. I mean, this 8th grader, I'm giving you the biggest virtual hug. I can't even bear to think of what that must feel like to be such a young person having such difficult conversations. So I send you my virtual hugs and my virtual love, and I got your back, and I will help you answer all those questions or help you not answer those questions and instead focus on things that bring you joy.
And if I can add to what Chelsea just said too, I think what you talked about, you got to talk to somebody about it. And I just applaud that 8th grade student for posing that question. And I hope that the adults that are listening and watching are hearing this from an 8th grader. I mean, so many times young people are walking around with a monkey on their, no, it's a gorilla on their back, and they don't know who they can talk to. If they can't talk to, like Chelsea said, she had a lot of friends, but not allies, right? So who can you really talk to about these things? And I often ask kids when I do school assemblies, you know, by a show of hands, how many of you know anybody that's talked to you about, you know, even contemplating taking their lives, you know, through suicide, you know, and that's going on today. We hear about those conversations. Just Tuesday, I was in a meeting in San Diego, a virtual call. It's Black Men and Black Women United. And one of the persons on the call is an administrator, one of the high-ranking administrator in San Diego Unified School District, who's in Atlanta right now with 10 high school seniors trying to get them placed in Morehouse and Spelman and other places down south. And she got a call from her son in San Diego who was pulled over by the police and talked about how the police treated them. And she's telling us this story and didn't know as a mother what to do. And fortunately on the call was one of the assistant chiefs of police for the city of San Diego, who took it and ran with it right away. But if you can't talk to your parents, if you can't talk to a friend, if you don't have somebody at the Waldorf school that you can talk to about what's going on in your world, this is a heavy burden to carry. And I really applaud this 8th grade student and all of you that are thinking about everything that you heard here today. And what's the beautiful thing about going virtual, and this is being recorded, you can play this back if you missed something, because there's a whole lot of information that's been left here and also in the chat. If you know anything about chats, make sure you go to the chat, hit that where you next to that word file where you see the 3 dots, hit those 3 dots, save the chat, and you'll have all the comments, all the links, everything. I know Chelsea and everybody else can put their information on. So if you ever want to get in touch with any of us, you can call us, write us, email us, and find out more about what we're talking about, what we're doing, and what we can do to help support you beyond this call today.
Wow. I know we're running out of time, but I just want to get in one last question. This is from a student, I believe Kimmy. She asks, as a special individual in this community, or especially a foreigner, do you think actually the allyship we are talking about here is really shared with the international students? The reason why I ask about this is because actually we shared a whole lot of sympathies and indeed are confronting many of the same problems. Anyone can unmute.
To clarify, is the question about the role of international students in allyship? Is that, if that's the case, what I'll say is, I would say international students have the exact same role to play as an ally and accomplice. A great example is at Harvard. Actually, there are plenty of international students. A lot of my closest friends are international students, and they bring really unique perspectives. I think, for example, if you come from the UK, there are a lot of instances of similar police violence, but also really, really different dynamics at play. And being international, I think, can be challenging sometimes in trying to understand why we are where we are in the United States, because the United States has a really specific history of slavery, history of Jim Crow violence, all of these things. And so everything we've talked about regarding how to be a good ally and accomplice is the same. radical empathy, teaching yourself, asking for resources to better understand how we got to where we are, and also sharing your story. I think like our conversation here is very America centric because we're chatting with you all at an American school, and I think every one of us here is an American citizen on the panel. But there are some really, really important racial justice issues going on in other realms of the world, and it's not linear in that there's a priority list of like, oh, we got to tackle this issue first and then this other one, or like an Olympics or a competition of what issue matters more. I'm a firm believer that we can liberate everyone at the same time. And so, great example, I wasn't aware a couple weeks ago about a farmers' protest in India. And I also am not someone who's deeply learned in issues around caste and colorism, and in places like India where it seems very homogenous. It's like one nation of one race, but I had to teach myself and then be more informed going to that next conversation, and then make room for my international friends who have family members who are involved in all of that to talk about it, because it's just as important. And understanding that will further empower our current movement in the United States to liberate our Black and Brown family and friends. Yeah.
Thank you for that input. I know we're coming at time and there's fortunately not a lot of questions that we could take, but I just want to ask the panelists to say their last thoughts or words. I know that there's a few questions in the chat that they might want to address as being the last speaking point. I know people are putting in their contacts, so anyone could go ahead and contact them, which is great. Yeah, but I just wanted to have your last thoughts and advice for us as students. Yeah.
I can kick off my last thought, which is, as the person here who most recently was in high school, I can say high school is hard. It is really, really hard. I struggled a lot. And I remember feeling like it was me versus the world. And I was just trying to get through the day. Like, I have so much homework, and I was tired trying to do extracurriculars. Also, like trying to get into college. And based off my conversations with your principal, it sounds like Waldorf is a very rigorous high school, which sounds like my experience as well. And so take care of yourself. And I wish I could go back in time and shake 16-year-old Irene and say, like, you're taking life way too seriously. Focus on spending time with the people you love, and like really cherishing that. And COVID has made that even more clear to me. Life is too short to be freaking out about, getting into your top choice college or things like that. And also remember that there are people who are here to help. And so, I dropped my contact in the chat, and I'm happy to chat about the YX Foundation, about the topics that we discussed here, but I'm also happy to be a resource to any student at Waldorf as you think through your next steps. If you're a junior, especially my heart goes out to the juniors and seniors in the room. Gosh, that was such a tough time for me. So if you want to chat with someone about college, maybe non-traditional pathways after college, I took some time off from school as well. Please don't hesitate to reach out. And I'm really, really proud of you all, and want to give like massive props to Sonali and Zimia for putting this on. Your peers with some incredible people. Yeah.
Great comments. And since Irene is the closest one to the high school students, I'm probably the furthest one from you in terms of graduating with the class of 1970. And we missed our 50th reunion because of COVID, but I'm just looking back on those days and just thinking about what happened at the age of 15, seeing my city burn. So there's a movie out. We talked about movies and books. The movie Detroit will tell you all about what happened in 1967 in July, one of the worst riots in the history of this country. I saw the tanks roll down Woodward Avenue, and I was a witness to that. I understood it. But right behind it, the following April in '68, we all know that the Reverend Dr. Martin Luther King Jr. was assassinated. So you've got riots, you've got the assassination, you've got Vietnam, you've got civil rights. All of those things were going on when I was in high school. But I'll tell you one thing, it helped form me to where I am today, because after retiring on January 4th, I started reading some books. One was by my good friend and mentor, Ken Blanchard, who wrote the book Refire, Don't Retire. And then another one's by Bob Buford, who it was called Halftime. And in both books, the themes were to turn your success into significance. So often you can work all your life, you could be as successful as you ever think you want to be, but then at the end of the road, you don't really feel significant in what you've done. After reading those books, I said to myself, I've always felt significant about what I've done. And it's because of those allies I had growing up in Detroit who helped protect me from myself until I could get on cruise control with my life that really made a difference. And so on this panel today, with the folks we see here, with Kevin and Irene and Chelsea and Jeffrey, man, you guys have been awesome. It's been an honor to serve with you today. And I want to thank the students at the Waldorf School for the invitation, and hope we get to stay in touch into the future. Thank you.
I'll go next, and I'll be brief. I just want to first and foremost, again, thank Waldorf for the opportunity to speak and to share in this space with you all. I've learned so much from the questions as well as from the other panelists. I would just say, as final words, just be affirmed in who you are in this moment, as the previous panels have stated. High school, middle school, high school, it's a weird time. I remember just struggling in so many different ways, in part because as a person who was evolving, I didn't trust or who I was in that moment. So I'm sharing with you what I would share to, myself of yesteryear. It's just, know that you matter, right? And where you are now, and it's for a reason. Continue to lean into each other. These are some wild and crazy times, right? And so community is everything. And what you have to offer is of great importance. You're going to look back on this moment, living it through this time, making it through this time, being like, like I did it, like you're learning so many lessons along the way. So I would just encourage you all to just kind of, support each other, lean into this moment, take care of yourselves, and just love each other. Again, great pleasure sharing this space. Thank you so much to the moderators. Y'all killed it, by the way. Y'all did an amazing job.
Am I last? Okay, well, I'll just go anyway. So I want to, before I say my full last comments, I really want to lift up the question from Kimmy around the role of international students. And you made me think about, for those who are familiar with Angela Davis, a Black feminist kind of leader and elder at this point, who's well into her 70s and been doing this work forever. What I learned from Angela Davis is to constantly be internationalist in our analysis, right? So we know that racial discrimination is not a unique American problem. I mean, the way that it manifests itself is unique, but we know that racial discrimination, particularly anti-Blackness, is global, right? And we also know that all of the issues that you all are really passionate about, whether it be climate change, whether it be gender inequality, whether it be racial justice, whether it be LGBTQ rights, et cetera, are all deeply, deeply connected, not only in the US, but abroad as well. So as we think about the folks and the students in your class who are either international students, or perhaps maybe are children of immigrants, or whatever, right, have all these different experiences, we really do need to push ourselves as Americans and as folks who are living and learning in the US to make sure that we're broadening our scope and talking about these issues from a global lens. So I really appreciate that question. And I now wish I could almost do this entire panel differently, because I think there's ways that I would have talked about the work that perhaps wasn't so US centric. So thank you for that. And I mean, and perhaps that dovetails well into my advice to you all, right? Is we know that all of these issues are interconnected, right? Capitalism, colonialism, racism, patriarchy. So my advice to you is question everything. Everything. Take nothing for granted. Do not say this is how it's supposed to be. Question everything, and question everything every day, right? So ask why, and then ask yourself why maybe 10 more times, right? And work with each other to ask those whys. and know that there is no easy answer. And in fact, at most times there is no answer, right? There are just more questions, there are better questions, right? So work in community with each other to question, to ask, to find better ways to do things. You all really will learn way more from each other than you'll ever learn from some folks who graduated from school, which, by the way, I only graduated from high school like 10 years ago, so I don't think I'm that old just yet. But a lot, I guess, has changed since I left those high school doors. So nonetheless, I believe in you all, and I really am grateful. And I think, again, this panel is just an example of what student leadership, right, and student activism can bring, right? The BSU didn't exist, from my understanding, up until recently. So you all took the initiative to create a new organization and then to create this event. So you are already questioning things, and you are already posing solutions to some of these things. So continue to do so, right? Don't be afraid of authority and of folks who are telling you no or trying to temper your questions. Continue to ask questions. And again, dig, and keep digging. We need you. We need your questions. We need your perspective. So thank you so much. I know we are past time. I'm not sure if we have one last panelist to close us up.
Yes.
Yeah.
I'll just ask Jeffrey to close us up. And I love your artwork. It is so gorgeous.
Thank you. Yeah, and real quick, I apologize. We had a water main break behind me here because the ice is thawed. And so we had about 22 inches of snow that has melted in 2 days. And so I was trying to get this handle before it came into the gallery, which I was able to do. But first, thank you to the school. Amazing job, students. I want to make sure that I commend you all for doing this and pulling this together. And then to your administrators and your leaders of the school for creating space to do this as well. I'll end with a quick story, right? And then be a wrap. So one of my favorite African proverbs goes, there was a little bird in the forest who saw a forest fire. And the bird began to go to a local small stream, and back and forth, the bird would grab water with his beak and try to drop it on the fire. And all the other animals looked at the bird and started to laugh. And they asked the bird, what do you think you're doing? And the bird had a simple reply, as much as I can for as long as I can. In this time, in the last year, Kevin said it, you all have not just lived and worked and done school from home. You've done school from home in the midst of a global pandemic while racial unrest is really challenging and rebuilding, hopefully tearing at the fabric of this country to rebuild it for better. I want to make sure that you all know that it's okay to step back. It's okay to not be okay. It's okay to say, I need a moment. And then it's okay to say, you know what, now I'm ready to push forward. And whatever push forward feels like and looks like for you, I encourage you to continue to do it. I encourage you to continue to fight for justice and change, even if it's in your school locally, in your community, or in your homes. That's the way by which we change things and make them better. To continue to do as much as you can for as long as you can. And I'm grateful for the opportunity to sit with you all, even virtually, today. Thank you.
All right, I think that ends our Black Experience and Allyship Forum. I want to say thank you to all the panelists for taking the time to share your experiences, your commitment to inclusion and diversity, and your advice to give us students. It was very inspirational, and thank you. Thank you for Sanaa for bringing these panelists together. And yes, I think next period is period F that will be going to. And the person to close it out will be Mr. Roomworker.
There's nothing that I could possibly say that can top anything that's been said. So have a good afternoon. Thank you so much. It's been wonderful. Thank you.